year and were returned at the end of the first session of the 118th Congress and have been re-nominated. This includes numerous nominees from Republican states, including South Carolina, Florida, and Indiana. All of the nominees were deemed held over last week and are eligible for a vote today. I will be brief because we have a lengthy agenda. Let me first note that our friend and colleague, Senator Grassley, former chair of the committee, is currently under the weather. I'm sure I speak for everyone on the committee in wishing Chuck a speedy recovery. He loves to text, and Senator Cornyn said he texted him yesterday, and I texted him this morning, so we're waiting for a reply. I told him, thank you for enhancing the Democratic majority by your absence, but he'll be back in fighting form, I'm sure, very soon. I will now turn to Ranking Member Cornyn for any remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciated the kind words you shared a few weeks ago about Senator Cruz and me working with the White House to identify qualified judicial nominees. Thanks to our Federal Judicial Evaluation Committee, or FJEC as we call it, we helped identify and confirm incredibly qualified nominees, including Judge Irma Ramirez, who's the first Latino woman on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, and Judge Kazin for the Southern District of Texas just last week. Both were confirmed on an overwhelmingly bipartisan basis, and I think that speaks to the quality of jurists we have in Texas and the thorough process that we use to identify and vet nominees. Next week, we'll have a hearing on two more Texas nominees for the Western District of Texas, Judge Leon Scheidlauer and Ernest Gonzalez. Both are impressive nominees as well. There are a number of nominees on today's markup who are evidence of the cooperation and collaboration between the White House and red state senators. I commend Senators Young and Braun from Indiana, and Senators Rubio and Rick Scott from Florida, and Senators Graham and Tim Scott from South Carolina for their collaboration. I intend to support some of these nominees, including Judge Lund for the Northern District of Indiana and Judge Austin for the District of South Carolina, given their impressive qualifications and record of excellence. There have been some news stories about whether the chairman would continue to recognize the blue slip for district court nominees, and it seems to me that given the track record of cooperation last Congress and this Congress by red state senators, there would be no basis to change the current policy. I know collaboration is hard, and some of the radical factions on the left want to blow up every institutional norm, including the filibuster. But as you know, it's an important institution and prerogative to have the home state senators weigh in on judicial nominees, and I actually think we come up with a better product. The fact that Senator Cruz and I have been able to work so effectively with the Biden administration on judicial nominees is proof that cooperation is not just possible, it's also deeply important. So I commend the fact that you've recognized the blue slip in today's markup as a testament to cooperation from my colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle. There are many other nominees on today's markup, and unfortunately not all are fit to serve on the bench. One of them, Judge Kasubi, is particularly troubling. It became clear that he has an agenda and will not give litigants, particularly those who are seeking to vindicate their faith, religion, or conscience objection, a fair shake. Indeed, he requires people in his courtroom to announce their preferred pronouns. We live in a diverse country where some people find that sort of question to be appropriate and others do not, and that's fine. But we can't have a federal judge who will effectively mandate this sort of proclamation or chill anyone who may have a religious or conscience objection to doing something like that should they appear before the bench. Imagine what it would look like if a judge told the parties before him or her to announce before the entire court whether they identify as Christian, Jewish, atheist, Muslim, or some other religion. Would we tolerate that? Our court system is blind to who you are, where you come from, how rich you are, or who you represent. Everyone gets a fair shake under our system, no matter what. That's required under our Constitution, and judges must set aside all their personal beliefs and strictly apply the law, or they're simply unqualified to serve. Judge Kusabi has has proven that he will not do that. In an essay he authored in 2021 while serving as a federal magistrate judge, he said, "We have to set aside conventional ideas of proof when we're dealing with the interpersonal work of equity, diversity, and inclusion." That's an astounding statement from a federal magistrate judge. Let me repeat. He says you need to set aside conventional ideas of proof. That's saying we need to set aside the law. A federal magistrate judge said that in a legal bulletin when discussing his ability to see things in an unconventional way, or, as he called it, understanding truth. What I take that to mean is that he will set aside the facts, the law, and the applicable legal standard to get the result he wants. And if you happen to be a litigant asserting a religious liberty claim, for example, or perhaps someone trying to protect your conscience under the Religious Freedom Registration Act, you better hope you don't draw Judge Kusabi. I also have serious concerns about another nominee on the markup, Judge Adele Manji, who was nominated to be a Third Circuit judge. I'm troubled by this nominee's views on a number of issues, chief among them being terrorism and anti-Semitism. As each of us know, on October the 7th, the world changed when the terrorist group Hamas attacked innocent civilians in Israel. They brutally murdered, abused, and kidnapped innocent civilians. The singular goal of Hamas is to eliminate the Jewish people and to wipe Israel off the map. Since that attack, we've seen a wave of disturbing anti-Israeli rhetoric spread like wildfire across social media and even here in the halls of Congress. Last weekend, we saw the last chapter in Blaming the Victim, where thousands of protesters gathered here in Washington to demand a ceasefire in Gaza. They accused Israel of being an apartheid government and outrageously claimed that the United States, through its support of Israel, was supporting genocide. I was struck by a column that I saw in this morning's Wall Street Journal. The caption is, "My one-year-old cousin is a Hamas hostage." What kind of person takes a one-year-old child hostage? Well, I think we know the answer to that. But of course, all this claiming that somehow Hamas is the victim and not the aggressor or oppressor here is exactly backwards. It's divorced from reality, and I think we have a responsibility, because we know better, to call out and correct the lies that are spreading across the country. From 2019 to 2023, Mr. Manji was on an advisory board and donor of an extreme anti-Israel, anti-Semitic organization called the Center for Security, Race, and Rights at Rutgers Law School. The center, through sponsorship, events, and publications, regularly promotes explicit anti-Semitism and whitewashes terrorism, including the attacks that occurred in our country on 9/11. Even Representative Josh Gottheimer, a New Jersey Democrat, condemned the center by name for an event it held to downplay the significance of 9/11. He said, "It's unconscionable that a day meant to reflect on the deadliest attack on United States soil was used to provide a platform for those affiliated with Palestinian Islamic Jihad." In 2021, the organization published a resource guide on Palestine, which provided links to a multitude of anti-Israel and anti-Semitic hate groups and publications, including Jewish Voices for Peace. The following year, it hosted an event where one of the speakers said, "There's a deep identification among many conservative white American Christians with Israel, and it partly comes from the fact that Israel, like the United States, is a settler colonial state." During this entire period of time, Mr. Manji was advising and donating to the center. During his confirmation process, he was given many opportunities to renounce these views, explain his donations, and distance himself from statements calling Israel a settler colonial state. Senators Cruz, Hawley, and Kennedy repeatedly asked him to clarify his views, affiliation, and financial support for anti-Semitic organizations. His answers were extremely troubling. They were evasive, and they were divorced from reality. He denied even knowing what was going on. Do we really believe he had no knowledge of the deeply hateful and anti-Semitic nature of the institution that he advised, donated to, and worked for a number of years? Well, a number of organizations aren't buying it. Here's a letter from the Coalition for Jewish Voices. They write, Mr. Manji's alliance with the center raises genuine concerns about his judgment and his commitment to American principles. Those concerns have nothing to do with his religious background or faith. Here's another letter from the Zionist Organization of America, Americans Against Anti-Semitism, Stop Anti-Semitism, and Students Supporting Israel. The letter makes the prescient point that this nominees association and financial support for such an anti-Semitic organization disqualifies him outright. They write, if a nominee for a top judicial post asserted that he was merely a Ku Klux Klan advisory member and merely advised the Ku Klux Klan's academic research, his nomination would be flatly rejected. Manji likewise should not be confirmed. The final nominee I want to discuss is Nicole Berner, who was nominated to be a Fourth Circuit judge. There are many reasons to oppose this nomination, but her open hostility to religious liberty and Christians is extremely troubling. In a media interview she did not disclose to the committee, Berner criticized the planned Catholic community of Ave Maria in Florida and argued that they were not allowed to choose pharmacies for the community that did not dispense birth control. She also signed on to an amicus brief in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, advocating forcing a baker to make custom cakes for same-sex weddings that he did not approve of, which would have caused him to violate his conscience and religion. And then she signed into an amicus brief in Carson versus Macon, arguing to uphold a Maine law which excluded religious schools from participating in a tuition assistance program. This animus toward religion, houses of worship, and people of faith causes me deep concern and tells me that she's unlikely to give similarly situated litigants a fair shake in her courtroom if confirmed. I'll finish where I started. There's some good nominees on today's markup, and I commend my colleagues from red states for willing to work with the House in good faith. But there are also some deeply troubling nominees on the markup, and we can do much better as a country than Judge Kusabi, Mr. Manji, and Ms. Berner. And I urge my colleagues to vote no on those nominees. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to just remind my colleagues for the record that 4 years ago, under like circumstances, President Trump had 13 nominees, judicial nominees on the calendar as we at the close of business of that calendar year. And the Democrats allowed those 13 to be voice voted so that they wouldn't have to be returned to committee. That's why we're going through this exercise now. That courtesy was not extended to us for those on the calendar at the end of the last calendar year. So we're going through some of these nominees for the third and fourth time. And I'm sure most members can recall the speeches that were given over and over again. Some will be given again today. But we are going to finish this and return these nominees to the calendar if that's the will of the committee. First up is Seth A. Frame, nominated to the First Circuit. Does anyone seek recognition to speak?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're right, it's a new year, and we are, again, talking about and voting on some of these egregious and offensive judicial nominees. And one of the worst that this administration has put forward is Seth A. Frame. I've talked about him a good bit. You're right about that. But I think that we need to repeat this because he has been involved in two cases that I think these two cases clearly disqualify him from ever serving on a federal bench. Now, for the benefit of my fellow committee members, in case they've not heard it before, let me go through these two cases. The first case involved a criminal defendant guilty of unconscionable acts of sexual violence against a 14-year-old girl who had a hearing impairment. Think about that. Even worse, this defendant had a history of this vile conduct and had just been released from prison for sexually assaulting minors. Despite all of this, Mr. Ephraim, as the prosecutor in this case, recommended a sentence far below the probation officer's suggested guidelines. It is clear that Mr. Ephraim wanted a low sentence for this repeat offender who had sexually assaulted a 14-year-old girl with a hearing impairment, taking her across state lines, by the way. And I want to read you why he thought there should be a lesser sentence. He wrote, and I'm quoting him, and I quote, that the low sentence will incapacitate the defendant until he is in his 60s. Hopefully, by that time, the danger that the defendant presents will have subsided. Hopefully. So hopefully, by the time the guy is in his 60s, he will not be sexually aggressive. Now, I want you to just imagine what this little girl's family must have thought when they hear that hopefully their daughter's rapist won't go back on the streets and do it again. That hopefully he is going to be too old and frail to continue raping little girls. I think this is absolutely sickening. Now, in the second case, Mr. Ephraim, as the prosecutor, recommended a sentence of 60 years for a man who was found guilty of conduct that you cannot even begin to imagine. This defendant was so vile, so evil, so sick, that he created videos of himself sexually assaulting a 3-year-old girl. The details on this case are just too disgusting to even repeat aloud, but he raped a 3-year-old girl. He did this. He created videos of himself carrying out these atrocities. Think about that one. Mr. Ephraim, as I've noted, recommended 60 years, but the sentencing guidelines recommendation, life in prison. Mr. Ephraim himself noted in the sentencing memo this very fact. Frankly, for Mr. Ephraim to have recommended anything less than life in prison for this depraved human being is disgusting. So for the sake of men, women, and children around this country who are survivors of sexual assault, I urge all of my colleagues to join me in voting no on Mr. Ephraim's nomination.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. There are several facts which you did not mention, which I'd like to make a point of for the record. Mr. Ephraim was, in fact, the prosecutor in the cases that have been described. Members of this committee have criticized him for not seeking longer sentences in the two cases. There were circumstances that you haven't heard that you should hear. In one of those cases, the government did not seek a life sentence because doing so would have required calling the victim at a sentencing hearing. As Mr. Ephraim explained in response to questions for the record, the government consulted with the victim's family and determined that calling the victim was not proper in light of the possible further trauma that could have caused the victim. So it was a family decision. In the other case, the court sentenced the defendant consecutively on only 2 of the 6 counts with which he was charged due to a perceived double jeopardy issue. As Mr. Ephraim noted, the government requested a 60-year sentence, which was tantamount to a life sentence and substantially longer than the defendant's life expectancy. Notably, in both cases, the court handed down a shorter sentence than Mr. A. Frame as prosecutor asked for. That's an important fact that is usually omitted in this recounting of the two cases. There may be instances in which a nominee is rightfully criticized for a sentencing request. This is not one of them. To paint Mr. A. Frame, a highly qualified career prosecutor, as soft on crime is simply ludicrous. Anyone else seek recognition? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye.
Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff.
Aye.
Mr. Welch.
Aye.
Ms. Butler. Aye. Mr. Graham.
No by proxy.
Mr. Grassley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No.
Mr. Cruz.
No.
Mr. Hawley.
No.
Mr. Cotton.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn. Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 11, the nays are 10.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Nicole Berner, nominated to the Fourth Circuit. Does anyone seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I seek recognition.
Senator Lee will be recognized first. Senator?
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. I've got some concerns with this nominee who's been nominated to serve on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. Among other things, she spoke on the topic of economic justice at Rutgers University. And while delivering those remarks, she compared the Republicans serving on this committee in reference to the confirmation proceedings of Justice Kavanaugh to union busters. And it's an interesting comparison, not terribly eyebrow-raising in and of itself, other than when you look at what she actually said, and her reasoning makes no sense. Certainly not the kind of sense one should come to expect from a life-tenured federal appellate court judge. She said, quote, despite the fact that multiple women have incredibly accused Kavanaugh of having sexually assaulted them, Senate Republicans allowed only one woman to come forward to testify. They ignored or belittled the other accusers. The fact that Dr. Ford was the only person allowed by Republicans to pretend the situation was she said, she said. These techniques were taken directly from the playbook of anti-union employers during union organizing campaigns. And yet, in sharp contrast to that assessment, which is wrong in many, many ways, didn't really hold herself to the same standard. Her own handling of an SEIU complaint involving a sexual harassment scandal demonstrated that she sometimes does think women who accuse men with authority over them in cases involving sexual harassment perhaps should be ignored. At least that's how she proceeded. She failed to disclose to this committee her involvement in the sexual harassment problems, prominent problems within SEIU. And second, her actions in that particular case, as detailed in an expose published by a pro-labor website, the Payday Report, appear to show that she declined to meaningfully investigate multiple serious allegations of sexual harassment by SEIU officers and affiliates. She declined, despite the obligation to do so, to disclose her candidacy in the 2020 World Zionist Congress elections, despite the fact that it was clear she was required to do so. She failed to disclose a 2020 letter taking some strident positions regarding Israel and its approach toward Judea and Samaria, even though she was required to disclose that. She holds some pretty radical union labor-focused views, including promoting policies that would make it illegal for an employer to inquire about a worker's immigration status during an organizing campaign, requiring prisoners who work in prison to be entitled to labor law protections, including minimum wage. She promotes policies of workplace councils, which would require 40% of corporate board seats to be controlled by workers, and requiring a supermajority of board members to make corporate decisions that directly affect workers, such as decisions to declare bankruptcy, close a plant, lay off a significant number of workers, and so forth. And she said, quote, "At its core, the right to work movement is deeply racist." Interesting and indefensible. She opposed the planned Catholic community of Ave Maria in Florida because, as a staff attorney at Planned Parenthood put it at the time, she determined that the community would favor a pharmacy that would not sell birth control and banning one that sold contraceptives altogether. That's a quote. Her name appeared on an SEIU brief in Reproductive Health Services of Planned Parenthood of the St. Louis region versus Parson. The case concerned whether Missouri's prohibition of abortions performed solely because of Down syndrome, solely because the baby being aborted had Down syndrome, was per se valid. You couldn't protect a baby with Down syndrome on the basis of it having Down syndrome. She even went so far as to argue that such protections for babies with Down syndrome would be patently unconstitutional. And she has said that Margaret Sanger, the infamous eugenicist founder of Planned Parenthood, is one of her childhood heroes. These statements concern me, and they don't reflect the careful, reasoned judgment of someone with whom we should be entrusting a life-tenured position as an appellate court judge. Thank you.
Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate that Senator Lee pointed out so many of the issues around Ms. Berner's nomination. Just to drill down on one of those points, she was the general counsel at the SEIU for 17 years, and sexual harassment allegations have been pervasive at the SEIU. And I think that everyone on this committee should agree that no employee should ever have to endure the trauma of sexual harassment in the workplace. And according to a 2019 report, the SEIU knew about these allegations. So she knew. The SEIU failed to take an action. So she was involved in that decision. And they went so far as to actually promote some of the men who were accused of sexual misconduct. Some of the ways that she handled this are unacceptable, and making the statement that she was going to leave this to be investigated by the local union in one of those cases where one of the accusers was the president of a local union. I can't imagine the culture that she created, and I find her nomination unacceptable and her being on the federal bench unacceptable.
I want to clarify one thing for this nominee in the debate before this committee. Repeatedly, the name of one union official was named in this committee as still working for the union, having been at least suspected of sexual harassment. Let me make it clear that is false. False as to David Reagan, local union president, whose name was mentioned in this committee several times. Miss Sturgis, alleged harasser, was investigated and fired by the local union before Ms. Sturgis even wrote to the International Union, as the letter states. She did not complain of sexual harassment by the local union president, David Reagan. I want to make that clear because I think his reputation was damaged by the statements that were made earlier. Anyone else wish to speak? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar. Aye. Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Pardon?
Ms. Hirono.
Okay.
Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff.
Aye.
Mr. Welch.
Aye.
Ms. Butler.
Aye.
No by proxy.
Mr. Grassley,
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn,
No.
Mr. Booth, Mr. Cruz. No. Mr. Hawley. No. Mr. Cotton,
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy,
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis,
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn. Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 11, the nays are 10.
Nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Joshua Kohler, nominated to the Seventh Circuit. Does anyone seek recognition? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar. Aye. Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono. Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Welch.
Aye.
Ms. Butler. Mr. Graham.
Yes by proxy.
Mr. Grassley.
Yes by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
Yes.
Mr. Lee.
No.
Mr. Cruz.
No.
Mr. Hawley.
No.
Mr. Cotton.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
Yes by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
Yes by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn. Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 16, the nays are 5.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Adil Mangi, nominated to the Third Circuit. Does anyone seek recognition to speak on his nomination?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Cruz, Senator Cruz, I'll take you first, and then Senator Lee and Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have deep concerns about this nominee, and I would note we have talked at length in this committee about the nature of Joe Biden's judicial nominees. He is consistently seeking people who are extreme, who are partisans, and who are out of the mainstream. Today, we are voting on several judges whose records, quite frankly, are extraordinary. And it is consistently disappointing that no matter what a judge has done, a judicial nominee has done, no matter how extreme their record, the Democrats on this committee will vote in favor of those nominees. Mr. Mangi served for years on the Board of Advisors of a radical and anti-Semitic law center at Rutgers. It was called the Center for Security, Race, and Rights. That center hosted an event on the 20th anniversary of September 11th, challenging the, quote, narrative regarding that gruesome terror attack. The existing narrative concerning 9/11, to the extent that there is one, is that vicious terrorists launched a cowardly attack and killed thousands of American civilians. Call me crazy, I don't think that's a narrative that needs to be rethought. It's pretty accurate in terms of what happened, but apparently the center did not think so. The panel of speakers at the event included, firstly, an actual terrorist. I'm not joking. Sami al-Arian, who in 2006 was convicted of conspiracy to contribute services or benefits to a terrorist organization, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, spoke on this 9/11 panel. The panel also featured Hatem Bazian, who explicitly called for intifada in the United States. That's not rumor or innuendo, it's on video, and it's undisputed. Is that a mainstream position? Apparently Senate Democrats think it is. To have another October 7th here in the United States. Are my Democratic colleagues okay with this? Or do they simply believe the press will not report anything, no matter how extreme these nominees are, so they can be safe? This event also featured Professor Rabab Abdul Hadi, who had hosted her own events in San Francisco, ones that platformed and featured an actual terrorist and plane hijacker, Leila Khaled. Mr. Mangi, who was on the advisory board of this center, while all of this was transpiring. Now, if this were just a single isolated event, maybe it would be a different story. But instead, the opposite is true. This sort of radical political programming was at the very core of this organization Mr. Mangi was involved in. In May of 2021, the center held an event called, quote, the 100 Years War on Palestine Teach-In. A Jewish news syndicate opinion piece entitled, quote, Hamas apologists slander Israel at Rutgers Teach-In described the event as, quote, terrorist whitewashing webinar. Among other things, speakers at the event explained that, quote, Israel has succeeded in painting Palestinian resistance as terror. Understand the Democrat senators on this committee are perfectly fine with that. They don't have a problem with that at all because they're getting ready to vote for a judge who served on the advisory board and saw event after event after event and didn't see anything he disagreed with because he kept serving there. On September 2022, the center held another event entitled, quote, Consistent Partiality, U.S. Foreign Policy on Palestine, Israel. One of the speakers, Peter Beinart, stated, quote, there's a deep identification among many conservative white American Christians with Israel, and it partly comes from the fact that Israel, like the United States, is a settler colonial state. The Democrats on this committee agree with that? Apparently, they're willing to vote for judges that do. On May 29th, 2021, the director of the center, Professor Sahar Aziz, signed a letter which was posted on the center's website, which read, quote, a ceasefire does not end the colonial conditions of structural violence and inequality that Palestinians live under. The letter went on, quote, the Palestinian rights to freedom, security in their homes, to return, self-determination, and to be free of violent occupation are well established under international law. The language of both-sidedness, of timeless or religious conflict with moments of escalation erases the military, economic, media, and diplomatic power that Israel, an occupying force, has over Palestine. The most shocking part of this statement reads, quote, we are in awe of the Palestinian struggle to resist violent occupation, removal, and erasure, and the expansion of Israeli settler colonialism. Well, after October 7th, are Senate Democrats in awe of that? We'll find out with their vote in a moment. I asked Mr. Angie, did he agree with these statements? Specifically, did he agree or disagree with Professor Aziz? And I have to say his answer was reminiscent of Sergeant Schultz in Hogan's Heroes. I know nothing. Who's she again? I asked him, did he agree with Professor Aziz's statement, whether Israel was an occupying force in Palestine? And he refused to answer. He said, it was too complex. Let that sink in for a minute. I have to say, I kind of wondered if he was auditioning to be president of Harvard. He just needs context to know whether the Hamas terrorist or the IDF are more problematic. He had the opportunity to denounce this event, to denounce these statements, to denounce this center, and he didn't do it. He just said, no, I don't know anything about it. I don't know anything about it. No, too complex. I have no idea. I have no views at all. He also tried to give this committee the impression that his connection with the center was extremely limited. What center? No, I was just on an advisory board. I have no idea what they're doing. Mind you, look, it's possible, I don't know, but it's possible he didn't know about this event celebrating terrorists on 9/11. It's possible he didn't know about the event before it happened, but you know what he didn't do? He didn't resign after it happened. He didn't say, whoa, I didn't know this is what you guys were doing. Nope, he was perfectly fine. And by the way, they kept on doing these events over and over and over again. But he wasn't just on the advisory board. He was a donor. He gave $6,500 of his own money, wrote it to the center. But that's not it. He didn't just give his own money. He also went to his law firm, Patterson Belknap, to help get the center an additional $13,000. So nearly 20 grand. And mind you, what Mr. Mangi wants to tell this committee is, yeah, I helped raise nearly 20 grand. I gave 6,500 myself. I was on the advisory board, but you can't blame me for anything. And mind you, he could have done what some of Biden's nominees do, which is take their record and run away from it, denounce it, say I was mistaken, I was young. No, he didn't say any of that. Instead, he just said it's too complex, he can't give an opinion. He didn't denounce any of this. And by the way, who recruited Mr. Mangi to the center? That would be the director, Sahar Aziz, the same woman who described Israel as an occupying force, quote unquote, that engages in, quote, settler colonialism. The Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West New Jersey has stated that Aziz, quote, regularly and consistently promoted vile anti-Semitic propaganda. The Senate Democrats agree with that, quote, vile anti-Semitic propaganda. Well, we're going to find out, and there's no surprise. Senate Democrats of the Russian Politburo, da, that's how you vote, no matter how extreme the nominee. I understand when your party's in power, it's expected that you vote for most of your president's judicial nominees. Many of us on the committee were here all 4 years Donald Trump was president. We had a number of nominees. I voted for most of those nominees. I understand that. I'm not expecting Democrats to suddenly start voting against a ton of Democrat nominees. But Joe Biden and this White House are seeking out radicals. And repeatedly, when President Trump made nominees who we deemed outside the mainstream, we said, no, that's not going to cut it. And we actually exercised advise and consent, the constitutional authority of the Senate. I do not understand why Senate Democrats believe they have no responsibility and why they're willing to rubber stamp these nominees, but I would urge every member of this committee to vote against this nomination.
Before recognizing another senator from the Republican side, I'd like to make a statement. It's been my honor to be on this committee for more than 2 decades. This is one of the best committees on Capitol Hill in terms of the opportunity to address issues of the moment and to make a difference in the selection of lifetime appointments for judicial nominations that will impact this country for years forward. I've sat through hundreds and hundreds of these nominations. Under President Biden, it's been close to 200 already. And in the past, like numbers in previous years. I will tell you what happened in this committee, the Senate Judiciary Committee, on December the 13th, 2023, to this nominee is a new low in this committee. A new low. What is it about Adil Mangi that attracts such criticism? We know what the starting point is. He would be the first Muslim American to be appointed to serve on the circuit bench. That's an amazing honor. There are only 3 other Muslim American federal judges, and he would have the highest rank among them. And we know because of that he is a target for things that he's done in the past. But like every other nominee, he has to let his life work speak for itself and answer the questions of this committee. So what is this man, and why should we be concerned? You've just heard a presentation, a suggestion that because of his background, he is likely to be either anti-Semitic or a terrorist because he's a Muslim American. Anti-Semitic or a terrorist. He said things over and over again during the course of the hearing where he could not have possibly been twisted to say that he is anti-Semitic. But don't take my word for it, a partisan supporter of President Biden's nominee. Think of one Jewish organization in America that you might turn to ask, what do you think? Is this man's background or statements anti-Semitic? I think it might be the Anti-Defamation League. ADL. We all know them. They've been around a long, long time. Let me read the letter that they wrote to this committee and every member after the questioning which you've just heard and similar questions from other Republican nominees. As the leading anti-hate organization in the world, whose mission is to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and treatment for all, ADL is compelled to speak out about the inappropriate and prejudicial treatment of Adil Abdul Mangi, a nominee for U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, during the Judiciary Committee hearing on December 13, 2023. During his confirmation hearing, Mr. Mangi was subjected to aggressive questioning unrelated to his professional expertise or qualifications. Rather, he was forced to provide responses to a wide range of inquiries regarding his views on global strategic considerations in a manner that inappropriately politicized these issues and raised serious questions about pretext and bias. The ADL goes on to report as follows. Just as associating Jewish Americans with certain views or beliefs regarding Israeli government actions would be deemed anti-Semitic, berating the first American Muslim federal appellate judicial nominee with endless questions that appear to have been motivated by bias toward his religions is profoundly wrong. Hate, bias, and bigotry have no place in government, especially in the hallowed halls of Congress. When nominees approach a congressional hearing, their religion, heritage, race, gender, or any other protected identity characteristic should not be the subject for political fodder. This was an attempt to create controversy where it does not exist, the ADL writes. ADL urges leaders to refrain from fueling discrimination and hate and urges the Senate to offer Mr. Mangi a fair vote based on his qualifications and fitness. That wasn't the only Jewish organization. Scores of Jewish organizations have written to us complaining about the way he was treated and supporting his nominations. And here's what the American Jewish Committee said. Mr. Mangi, who will be the first American Muslim to serve in this role, affirmed his belief in Israel's right to exist, his abhorrence of terrorism and any justifications for it, and outright rejection of anti-Semitism from the American Jewish Committee. Let me also report, if I can, that at the end of his questioning by Senator Cruz, I asked Mr. Mangi if he would want to give a complete answer. Here is what he said about the incident involved, the event that has been highlighted over and over again. I'll answer your question very directly, Senator Cruz. I will condemn without equivocation any terrorism, any terrorist, or any act of terrorism, or any defense of any act of terrorism. And this event, I don't know this event, Mr. Mangi said. I don't know anything about this event or who these people are. I've never heard of them. If someone on there is a terrorist, I condemn them. He said that under oath unequivocally. Did you hear that in the response by Senator Cruz? You did not, I'm sure. And so it comes down to the bottom line. Do we have the courage to stand up and say this was wrong, the way this man's been treated? Do we have the courage to say that assuming that everyone of a Muslim faith in America is a suspect terrorist or anti-Semitic? I hope we do. Senator Lee?
Mr. Chairman, I deserve a right to respond to that.
Well, you'll decide that, but I'll decide Senator Lee's
You've
right
impugned
next.
my character, and you made an accusation
I read
that
an
was a
ADL
vicious
letter.
lie. I'm going to quote from you what you said about me. You said that I had just asked a question, and here is a quote from you, Mr. Chairman, quote, that I had said he is likely to be anti-Semitic or a terrorist because he is Muslim. Now, you have just impugned my character by making a false accusation, and I will say it is disgraceful. Did you respond to any of the substance of what I said? No. You just attacked me and called me a bigot, and you responded by stating deliberate falsehoods. You said he would be the first Muslim. Well, you know what? I understand. Excuse me. I have a right to defend myself when you impugn my character in a way that is a new low for this committee. You did not dispute any of the facts I said about the organization, that he was an advisor of, he was a donor of, he raised money for. Instead, you said he'd be the first Muslim on the federal court. Well, no, that actually is not correct. And in fact, Mr. Chairman, in fact, So the Democrats don't want to defend the substance, so now they're screaming Islamophobia. And I understand playing the race card when anyone disagrees with the Democrats,
I
they
stand
scream
by the
racist.
ADL letter.
But
Senator Lee.
no, I'm going to defend myself because under the Senate rules, you have impugned my character in a way that is blatantly false. And let's just respond with facts, with substance rather than invective. Just recently, Zahid Qureshi was nominated by President Biden, was confirmed by the Senate. Like Mangi, Qureshi is a Pakistani American. He's a Muslim. And he was nominated to serve the people of New Jersey. However, unlike Mangi, he doesn't have association with a radical anti-Semitic group. He doesn't have association with whitewashing terrorism. Rather, Qureshi served in the Army. He was deployed twice to Iraq. He worked for the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and he served as a federal prosecutor. And he received 83 votes in the United States Senate for confirmation, the second most under Joe Biden, second only to a nominee from Texas, whom John Cornyn and I recommended. And so it is not the fact that Mr. Mangi is a Muslim that is his problem. It is the fact that his record is extreme. And by the way, if you want to look to Jewish organizations, the Zionist Organization of America has submitted a letter to this committee opposing the nomination. The Coalition for Jewish Values has submitted a letter to this committee opposing the nomination. Stop Anti-Semitism, a nonpartisan organization, has voiced their concerns with Mr. Mangi's affiliation. I want to introduce into the record, I ask unanimous consent to introduce into a record an article from the New York Post entitled, "Biden Judicial Nominee Draws Scrutiny Over Ties to Controversial 9/11 Memorial Event." I responded with substance and fact, and you responded with insults and invective that ignored the substance that Mr. Mangi deliberately associated with a consistently anti-Semitic organization, and yet Democrats are perfectly happy for him to be a federal judge.
I stand by the statement that I read into the record from ADL, and I also stand by
My
the
quote from you was not from ADL.
I stand by the record that I read it into the record, the statement from ADL, and I also stand by what was said under oath by Mr. Mangi after you finished trying to associate him with this organization, that he had no connection with it.
Did you just say he had no connection with this organization? Is that seriously what you said in this hearing? He was on the board of advisors, he was a donor and raised money for him, and you just said he has no connection with him?
See, you twist this situation.
Mr. Chairman, you just said he has no connection with this organization. Is that your view and the view of Senate Democrats?
Read his statement to you.
Is that your view, that he had no connection with this organization?
Senator Lee.
Okay, you're refusing to answer because it's obviously indefensible and false.
Senator Lee.
Mr. Mangi claims that he didn't know about the anti-Semitism pushed by the center. But unless he was hiding under a rock, I just don't see any plausible way that he could have missed all of this. All of this as a board member, and all of this given what we do know about his involvement. Now, Mr. Mangi, during his hearing, did in fact try to distance himself from it. As I would imagine he wanted to at the moment, badly. And in fact, in response to questions raised on this topic by Senator Kennedy, he said, referring to his relationship with the center, quote, "My role was limited to providing advice on academic areas of research, primarily through a meeting held once a year." Distant connection, he would suggest. The only problem is that that appears to be rather not true. Again, he gave personally $6,500 to the center, and he had his law firm donate an additional $13,000 to the center. And even if he had been involved in giving them advice on academic areas of research as a member of that board, who had raised considerable sums of money for the center, he must have known more about that. It's difficult to imagine that he would allow his name to be lent to the organization as a member of this board, had he not been willing to. Now, had he not been more aware of it, had he not been more in agreement with the objectives of this entity. Now, Mr. Chairman, you brought up the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. It is significant that they wrote that letter. I do wonder whether the Anti-Defamation League, in writing that letter, was aware of the other letters referenced by my colleague a minute ago, including the letter from the Coalition for Jewish Values or the Zionist Organization for America, or the fact that Americans Against Anti-Semitism, students supporting Israel, have also weighed in against it. And I also wonder whether ADL was aware of the rather hostile statements that the director of the center has made specifically toward the Anti-Defamation League. In February of 2022, less than 2 years ago, the director criticized the Anti-Defamation League in a post on Twitter, saying, quote, ADL has an ongoing pattern of attacking social justice movements by immigrants, Muslims, Arabs, while aligning itself with right-wing leaders and perpetrators of state violence. And then she linked an open letter urging progressives to, quote, drop ADL because, quote, we cannot collaborate with ADL without betraying our movements, close quote. There are countless Muslim Americans in this country who are members of the bar, many of whom are probably people who would be great judges. And most of them, I would imagine nearly all of them, have never identified with an organization so hostile toward Jewish people, so steeped in anti-Semitism. So, yeah, I oppose this nominee. And with all due respect, Mr. Chairman, this has nothing to do with this nominee's demographics. This has everything to do with the views embraced by an organization that has been materially supported over a number of years by the nominee. I oppose him. Thank you.
Say to the committee, for the record, what I read into the record from the LDL was the complete statement, every word that was sent by the ADL to the committee. Senator Booker?
I think there are other people before me, Mr. Senator.
There's only one, Senator Blackburn. Do you want her to go first? Is that all right, Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak out against these nominees because they are clearly unqualified. Now, I know that some of my Democratic colleagues probably don't pick up the Washington Times and read it on a regular basis, but they had an opinion piece in today about Mr. Mangi and his background, and I would commend that piece to you. Read it, because our concern, my concern...
Senator, is your microphone on?
Yes, it is on.
Would you get a little closer if you would, please?
Okay. My concern is his participation with the Rutgers Center for Security, Race, and Rights. When you look at the center, when you look at the activity that was there while he was on that board and actively participating with that center, when you look at the positions which my colleagues have discussed at length that this center holds, it gives me great concern what people would think someone who is Jewish coming before this judge would think when you look at those positions, just like with the other nominees that I've discussed this morning. Mr. Chairman, it gives me great concern what women would think, what sexual assault survivors would think. This is another of the unqualified nominees, and I will note that the center, as they reference the events of October 7th, responded to it as October 7th and Hamas, the attacks on Israel being a response to colonial violence and oppression. I'm a no vote on this nominee.
Senator Booker will be the last to speak before the roll call. Senator?
Mr. Chairman, could I go after Senator Booker,
I would
please,
yield
briefly?
I'll yield to Senator Hirono.
Senator Hirono is recognized.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, if confirmed, as you noted, Mr. Mangi would be the first Muslim American to serve as a federal circuit court judge. Representation matters. We sit here acknowledging the importance of diversity, and in fact, Senator Cornyn remarked just today that we are a diverse nation, and I would add, with a proud tradition of religious pluralism and diversity. And in my view, this nominee at his hearing was subjected to insulting and discriminatory questions based on his faith. Now, you may not agree with that, but that is my view, and this is a free country. And in my view, and that of many others, this nominee was subjected to insulting and discriminatory questions based on his faith. I myself am the only Buddhist ever elected to the United States Senate, so I do have some experience with the importance of religious diversity. I applaud the over a dozen Jewish organizations that wrote to this committee supporting Mr. Manji's nomination and denouncing religious discrimination of all kinds. And as I recall his hearing, I really don't know why. I mean, you're entitled to your views. You certainly are entitled to vote against any of these nominees. But as I recall his hearing, and I noted that he has an extensive pro bono practice with over 4,000 hours pro bono work on a range of issues, including religious discrimination. This is a person who knows about religious discrimination, employment discrimination, asylum. What is the fear that somehow he is not going to be able to be fair and objective and apply precedent as appropriate in his decision-making? What is the fear? Is it that he's going to bring the kind of representation and life experience that in fact will enable him to be fair and objective without an ideological axe to grind, which I would say a lot of the Trump nominees, in my view, had? So it's high time for this committee to vote for people like Mr. Manji, who has eminent qualifications. He has a commitment to providing free legal services in a range of issues for people who otherwise would not have the kind of representation that he could provide. I urge my colleagues to vote aye on this nominee.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cornyn, I'm sorry, I didn't know.
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe when Senator Cruz asked unanimous consent that a document be made part of the record, there was an opportunity for you to.
Without objection.
Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure that was.
Senator Booker will close the debate on this nominee. Oh, I'm sorry, did you want to speak?
I'll be brief.
Sure.
I think it's clear that the objection to Mr. Manji is not because of who he is, but what he's done. And his refusal to acknowledge the facts of his record. That's not the sort of candor that you would expect or that we deserve when it comes to exercising our advice and consent responsibilities under the Constitution. And I am really struck by the fact that here we are about 100 days after the worst terrorist attack against Israel in its history. I was just in Israel last week with members of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Senator Ossoff was there, among others. And I mean, this is like our 9/11. They're still traumatized, as you might imagine, by what happened to innocent men, women, and children, including the one-year-old hostage that I mentioned a moment ago that was featured in today's Wall Street Journal. So I think it's profoundly unfair to suggest that opposition to Mr. Manji is because he's a Muslim. As Senator Cruz pointed out, we voted overwhelmingly to approve a judge who is a Muslim by an overwhelming vote as to the District Court in New Jersey. I just don't think you can square the argument that the objection to Mr. Manji is because he's a Muslim when in fact we overwhelmingly have confirmed a Muslim judge to the district court in New Jersey. And I think it really, frankly, represents a new low for the committee to accuse a member of the committee for being somehow prejudiced against somebody because of their religion, when in fact it's clear that the objection is not to Mr. Manji for who he is or his religious beliefs, but rather what he has done. And thank you for giving me the chance to say a few words.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hawley.
Mr. Chairman, I was not going to say anything because I asked quite a few questions of Mr. Mangi, and so I thought I had made my views clear. But I have to say, after you, a moment ago, not only read that letter into the record, which you're perfectly entitled to do, but before you did that, you said that those of us who had questioned Mr. Mangi on that day took this committee to a new low. Oh, yes, you did.
I didn't name names.
You didn't name names. You said those of us who questioned him took it to a new low.
Some did.
And that would be those of us on this side. And I did question him on that day, and frankly, I resent the insinuation that those of us who asked him questions are somehow anti-Muslim or prejudiced in some way. I think it's outrageous. I think it's absolutely outrageous. And frankly, as someone who has worked across the aisle on any number of pieces of legislation, you know, Mr. Mangi, supported by my friend Senator Booker, that is certainly a major point in his favor. And it's been a delight to work with Senator Booker on pieces of legislation in this committee and with you, Mr. Chairman. But I have to say, it's hard to do when you call us anti-Muslim racists, which is basically what you just did a moment ago. It's on video. Everybody can see it. I mean, truly, that is absolutely outrageous. And so I'll just reiterate again, my issue with Mr. Mangi is I don't care what his religion is or if he has a religion. I don't care. But I do care that he was the director of a center that was basically a mouthpiece for Hamas. And he said over and over, all his concerns were academic. My question is, did he not have concern about Jewish students? We've seen Jewish students barricaded in libraries after October 7th, barricaded in libraries, fearing for their lives. Did he not think that a center which actively promotes genocidal rhetoric might have some effect on the students he was supposed to be helping? I think that's a legitimate set of questions. Now, we could disagree on it. Clearly, we do. And I say again, I respect the support that he has from Senator Booker and others. That's fine. But I think in light of the events of October 7th, not just overseas, but in this country, and in light of what Jewish Americans have suffered in this country, in my own state, in the state of Missouri, in the city of St. Louis, we've had Jewish businesses spray painted with the worst sort of anti-Semitic slogans, graffiti, swastikas. We have Jewish students in our campuses in Missouri on the WashU campus say they feel unsafe. I don't think it's unreasonable to ask a gentleman who advised a center on campus that has spouted this kind of propaganda why he was associated with them. So I just take strong exception to that, Mr. Chairman, and I have to say, I wish you'd retract your remarks because I think they were totally inappropriate.
I stand by the statement submitted to this committee by the ADL. The last person to speak will be Senator Booker.
Mr. President, I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I appreciate the comments of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. I think what I want to get to the bottom of is just truth. And I've heard things that were true from folks on the other side of the aisle, and I've heard time and time again things that are not true. I do appreciate my colleague, Josh Hawley, and I really do, and I think he was exceptionally generous to me a few moments ago, but he said, and I quote, Munji, was the director of a center that is a mouthpiece of Hamas. Well, that's factually not true. He was not a director of the center. He was one of 17 advisors. And if you look at the list of those advisors, there's a lot of prominent New Jerseyans that I hope nobody here would impinge the character of, civil rights activists and others that met once a year to evaluate specifically whether certain academic documents or ideas were worthy of a journal. And yet, I see how that is somehow being said to associate him with things that every single one of us find disgusting. Because at the end, my colleague Josh Hawley said correctly that he is associated with an organization that, frankly, had panels with multiple people on those panels. And a lot of us would find people that served as panelists, all of us on this committee would find ideas presented by some of these panelists as disgusting, but it is an association. It is guilt by association. And I've been hearing a lot about this idea of guilt by association. It's actually what fueled McCarthyism. People who had been pictures with or been part of organizations, and then tenuous claims were made about the actual beliefs of those individuals because they're associated with them. My colleague Blackburn, Senator Blackburn, just brought up a editorial that the picture associated with it, I don't think people took time to see, that had this judge literally with Hamas gear on, going to the extreme of claiming this person's a mouthpiece of Hamas, making this association that to me is, and I know actually to both sides of the aisle, such associations are sickening. She held up and introduced this into the record. Well, the author of that, let's go with the association. The author of that piece, that editorial, wrote this, tweeted this recently. The violent black underclass is a danger to America. I think it might be referring to me. I've been called underclass before, especially to hardworking, law-abiding black Americans and other minorities trapped in their ghettos. We must resume mass incarceration. In the meantime, America must arm up. These monsters, I guess human beings should, these monsters will kill. I assume my senator colleague finds that tweet offensive to some degree, but I'm not associating her with those ideas. I would never do that, even though she just introduced that author as somebody worthy of the record of the United States Senate. And I didn't read the full editorial. Maybe there's things in there that are important, but this guilt by association is kind of incredible that we're making here. I want to read because I left that. I was kind of down after the last hearing because of the way this justice was treated. And I just want to read facts. I make no aspersions to any of my colleagues. I just want to read the exchanges because every one of us finds what happened on October 7th abhorrent. Every one of us finds things going on college campuses abhorrent. Every one of us is against anti-Semitism. Every one of us has heard the painful stories of mezuzahs being ripped off doors, of violence against Jewish Americans and anti-Semitism. Every one of us shares those beliefs. And anyone who does not condemn them unequivocally is problematic to me. So let's see what this person did. Because I do agree with Senator Cornyn, who said it's not who he is, it's not his religion, it's what he has done. It's a direct quote from Senator Cornyn. I agree. It's not who he is. What has he done? Well, before I read the exchange with Cruz, let's go with the Senator Cornyn test. Mungie said, I am ready and prepared to be held accountable for any statement I've ever made, any word I have ever written, or any action I have ever taken. I have not been asked, however, about any such statement, word, or action that I have made. I am not and should not be held accountable for statements made by other people I do not know at events I was not involved with and only learned about during my appearance. And so here's the exchange. It's very important to me. Facts. Senator Cruz was making a connection that Mr. Mungie, repeatedly being interrupted by Cruz. This is their exchange. Mungie, Senator, I said this earlier, but let me repeat it because I think it's critically important. Cruz interrupting. Do you condemn the atrocities of the Hamas terrorists? Mr. Mungie, yes. That was what I was about to address. Actually, Cruz interrupting again. And is there any justification for those atrocities? Mungy, Senator, I repeat myself, the events of October 7th were a horror involving the deaths of innocent civilians. Cruz, I'm going to ask it again. Is there any justification for these atrocities? Mr. Mungy, that was going to be my next sentence, Senator, which is, I have no patience, none, for any attempts to justify or defend those events. Senator, I don't think anyone feels more strongly than me after being asked about 9/11, about what happened on 9/11, than someone who was there, who saw with my own eyes smoke billowing from the towers. Mr. Mungy condemned and disavowed terrorism and discrimination. Numerous points. I'll give you an example. I will answer your question very directly. I will condemn without equivocation any terrorism, any terrorist, any act of terrorism, any defense of any act of terrorism. I don't know anything about this event or who these people are. If someone is a terrorist, I condemn them, exclamation point. I certainly and unequivocally would condemn any terrorism and any people associated with it, he repeats. The events of October 7th were horrific, a horror. The acts on civilians were abominable. And against everything I stand for, I have no patience for any attempts to justify or defend those attacks on civilians. If anyone has any aspirations to attack minorities, minority communities, or indeed attack the Jewish community here in America, they would have to go through me first, end quote. Then he goes further. Any acts of anti-Semitism whatsoever or bigotry on college campuses is abhorrent. My children will be going to universities. I want them to feel safe. And I want the children of my Jewish friends and colleagues to feel safe too. That's the record. No aspersions to my colleagues who I know heard those statements. I heard the ADL question. The ADL has been attacked by people on the right. Their primary focus is to stop anti-Semitism. It's a pretty good litmus test, the letter that you read. I have not always agreed with the ADL. I've had times, but I've supported them relentlessly because of their mission. You read the letter, sir. They felt compelled to speak out about the inappropriate, and their words, not anybody casting aspersions, their word, the prejudicial treatment of Mr. Mungy. They called the questioning, this is them, not us. I'm not making any aspersions on my colleagues. Their characterization, berating the first American Muslim federal appellate nominee with endless questions that appear to have been motivated by bias towards his religion. Not my words, not my accusation. The ADL said it, Mr. Chairman. Appear to have been motivated by bias towards his religion. But I'm not saying that. That's the ADL. But then maybe this one Jewish organization got it wrong this time. Maybe one Jewish organization, the ADL, whose entire mission is to call out anti-Semitism, to evaluate it, maybe they're wrong. Well, the ADL wasn't the only one. There were multiple other Jewish organizations, 15, from the National Council for Jewish Women, from the American Jewish Committee. The American Jewish Committee specifically noted that Mr. Mungy affirmed his belief in Israel's right to exist, his abhorrence towards terrorism, and any justification of it, and outright rejection of anti-Semitism. It has joined several U.S. Supreme Court, he has joined several Supreme Court briefs, judge a person by their actions, and they find him to be an able jurist, a person of integrity, a champion of pluralism, and an adversary of discrimination against any group. That's the American Jewish Committee. 15 other organizations representing millions of Jewish Americans joined together representing an equivocal statement, a chorus, I'll tell you, of Jewish Americans, say that having ethical and unbiased judges is ingrained in our Jewish teachings, which are taught that judges need to be people of strength through good deeds. It is clear to us that Adil Munji is a person of strength and good deeds, his actual works, as evidenced by his career, devotion to community, and commitment to religious freedom and civil rights. I don't understand how people can conclude that his association with this one group that he was not on at October 7th, he had stepped off this advisory board in June of last year, that despite the totality of his career, all of his written statements of his life presented to us, all of his background presented to us, a thorough sifting of his college, law school, professional life, all of that, nothing has come up in any way to cast any shadow of a belief that he holds the beliefs that people were talking about, but for this one association where he sat with 16 other members on an advisory board about what should be accepted as part of a worthy academic paper. This board's job was not to evaluate the panels, was not to pick speakers. Once a year they met. To me, it smacks of a time, of an era I thought was past, which is to me McCarthyism, guilt by association. And if that language to my friends sounds extreme, well, I sat here and listened to my friends say the Dems, quote unquote, are the Russian Politburo. That's a direct quote from this hearing. And it smacks to me, again, of Eugene McCarthy-like guilt by association. And so, excuse me? Joseph McCarthy. Forgive me, thank you very much for my assistance. And so, look, I think we should take a vote up or down. Clearly, as the record states, this person condemns all the things that we share in condemning. Their career speaks to the values we hold dear. The qualifications for judges, I've heard this committee talk about all the time. Judicial temperament, the ability to fairly apply the law, to apply precedent, skills, and legal acumen. This is an outstanding judge. The bar in New Jersey, made up of a diverse plurality of people, believes this is an extraordinary judge. He would make an extraordinary judge. 15, 16, 17 Jewish organizations, including the one whose sole purpose is to fight discrimination and anti-Semitism, believe that he would be a great judge. And so I think we should get to the vote, but I will tell you, I do agree with you, Mr. Chairman. This has been a disappointing chapter in this committee for me. I cast no aspersions about the motivations of this whatsoever. I just simply say a great American and a patriot who's put his family and his young children up has now had his face associated in the most heinous ways in periodicals. His colleagues at his law firm have been called and berated. He's now got a swirl around him that is unfortunate. All of us on this committee would believe the kind of heinous things, hate and bigotry he's facing right now is unfortunate. Let's take a vote. Let's move him out of this committee, and let's move on.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, one point of clarity to my
Just a second. Please,
colleagues'
Senator.
comments.
Please, Senator Cornyn's first.
I will be brief, but I think our friend from New Jersey just accused us of McCarthyism. He's a skillful advocate and almost had me buying what he was selling. But the problem is, Senator Booker, is that, and I appreciate your acknowledging my test, I guess it is. It's not who he is, it's what he did, or I should say rather what he did not do. But at the hearing, when Senator Cruz and others, Senator Hawley, questioned him, he never repudiated his membership on this advisory board. He never repudiated his support for the organization from 2019 to 2023. I mean, this is not like when he was a kid, youthful indiscretion. This is something he did up until last year. And then, of course, he donated his money. It wasn't, you know, $6,500. I guess on his salary, that's quite a bit of money. And then, of course, got his law firm to donate $13,000. But he never left or withdrew his support once this association was identified. You know, we've all seen confirmation conversions. And sadly, sometimes I feel like the nominees are so scripted and they give answers that they practiced in front of murder boards, and they won't answer other questions that we really don't know very much about them, and we're just sort of going through the motions. But to me, the best evidence of who somebody is what they did and what they did not do in the past before they were nominated to the federal bench. And I think the questions about his service on the advisory board, the financial support, the fundraising, and the fact he never repudiated these radical views are facts that bear on his fitness to serve.
I just feel like I was directly named. I just want to defend myself. First of all, I accuse you of Eugene McCarthyism, not Joseph McCarthyism. And second,
I know you corrected yourself.
And secondly, I did not directly accuse. I said it sounds like it. And finally, I'll just say again, I could be wrong, but then the ADL is wrong. I could be wrong, then the UJC could be wrong. I could be wrong, then 15 other Jewish groups who wrote in support of this candidate could be wrong. Again, I will put my faith in the evaluation of this candidate to those organizations and rest in great confidence that this individual is not guilty in the associations that are being stated. But Senator Blackburn.
Senator Blackburn.
Very quickly, just to say, I did not submit the article for the record. And I do not want to submit the article for the record. I was making a point that there is a broader discussion about Mr. Manji and his activities just for the committee's awareness. Thank you.
I stand corrected.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye.
Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono. Aye. Mr. Booker.
Yes.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff.
Aye.
Mr. Welch.
Aye.
Ms. Butler.
Aye.
Mr. Graham.
No by proxy?
Mr. Grassley.
No by proxy?
Mr. Cornyn.
No?
Mr. Lee.
No.
Mr. Cruz.
No.
Mr. Hawley.
No.
Mr. Cotton.
No by proxy?
Mr. Kennedy.
No by proxy?
Mr. Tillis.
No by proxy?
Mrs. Blackburn. No. Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 11, the nays are 10.
Nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Jacqueline Austin, nominated to the District of South Carolina. Does anyone seek recognition on this nomination? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn.
No by proxy.
Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 19, the nays are 2.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Amy Baggio, nominated to the District of Oregon. Does anyone seek recognition on this nomination? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono. Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff.
Aye.
Mr. Welch. Ms. Butler. Mr. Graham.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Grassley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz. Mr. Hawley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn.
No by proxy.
Chair Durbin.
Aye. Senator Klobuchar.
Aye. Thank you. Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 12, the nays are 9.
Nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Jacqueline Becerra, nominated to the Southern District of Florida. Does anyone seek recognition? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono. Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Welch. Ms. Butler. Mr. Graham.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Grassley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz. Mr. Hawley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
Aye by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn.
No by proxy.
Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar. Aye. Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 13, the nays are 8.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. The next nominee is Crystal Briscoe, nominated to the Northern District of Indiana. Does anyone seek recognition? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar. Aye. Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono. Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff.
Aye.
Mr. Welch.
Aye.
Ms. Butler. Mr. Graham.
Yes, aye by proxy.
Mr. Grassley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz. Mr. Hawley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
Aye by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn.
No by proxy.
Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 14, the nays are 7.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Melissa Damian, nominated to the Southern District of Florida. Does anyone seek recognition on this nomination? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse. Aye. Ms. Klobuchar.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, are we on the Damien?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Klobuchar. Aye. Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono. Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff.
Aye.
Mr. Welch.
Aye.
Ms. Butler. Mr. Graham.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Grassley.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
Aye.
Mr. Lee.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cruz. Mr. Howley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton,
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy,
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Tillis,
Aye by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn,
No by proxy.
Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 19, the nays are 2.
Nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Mustafa Kujubai, nominated to the District of Oregon. Does anyone seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cruz?
Mr. Chairman, I've spoken about this nominee in the past, and there's a pattern when Democrats have problematic nominees, ones that would be embarrassing if their support for those nominees were widely publicized. They do what they're doing today, which is they flood the zone with nominees and they pack the objectionable ones in the middle, hoping no one notices. Well, Mustafa Kasubai is a particularly extreme nominee. President Biden has nominated his fair share of wild leftists, but it's not often that one has such a clear track record of, among other things, advocating for Marxist outcomes. Judge Katsubai has previously advocated for, quote, the integration of Marxist theory into the American economic system, and he has argued for a creative struggle to, quote, redefine property. He's not even bothering to hide his radicalism. And by the way, my colleague Senator Booker accused Republicans of McCarthyism, even if he wasn't sure if it was Eugene, Joe, or Kevin. But I would note that when I said Democrats are behaving as the Russian Politburo, I was not calling you communists. I was instead pointing to action. What did the Politburo do? It behaved like docile sheep doing whatever dear leader required. Your behaviors can refute the Politburo by having one Democrat vote no on one nominee, but none of you will. You all will do. You behave like the Politburo, which is why I said you behave like the Politburo. And here you have an instance to do so, to decide whether or not you want to vote for a nominee who has advocated for Marxism. Now, that's your choice. But if you always follow the orders of the White House, no matter how extreme the nominee is, then you shouldn't be surprised when you're compared to the Politburo, because that's what the Politburo did. I will also point out that Judge Katsubai has required litigants who come before him to refer to one another by their preferred pronouns, and pressured party to include their gender pronouns on their signature block. Now, I've litigated cases in front of a lot of judges. I've never seen a judge do this anywhere in the country, and it gives you a sense of just how extreme and radical this is. He's going to impose his ideology on you. If you're a litigant, you will knuckle under to this extreme ideology. He also proclaimed that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is the heart and soul of the court system. In fact, he went on to say, can we say that? Yeah, I just did, and I'm saying it proudly. Senator Booker, who is my friend, who I work with quite a bit, said that all of the Democrats are horrified by what's happening on college campuses. I wish that were a true statement. But I don't see Democrats speaking up, taking on the anti-Semitism at college campuses, taking on the DEI that is resulting in Jewish students feeling persecuted because radicals treat Jews as oppressors and treat Hamas terrorists as victims. I certainly don't want federal judges making decisions on the basis of race or vague expressions of leftist ideology. There's a reason that Lady Justice is blind, because a judge is not supposed to show prejudice or preference one way or the other for any race, for any religion. A judge is supposed to follow the law. And finally, what was particularly concerning was Judge Katsubai's actions during the violent riots we saw all across the country in 2020. When Portland, Oregon suffered months of violence at the hands of Antifa rioters, specifically singling out the Marco Hatfield Federal Courthouse for attack. For 60 days, 6-0, radicals laid siege to a federal courthouse, attempting to set it on fire, throwing Molotov cocktails, fighting federal officers, injuring law enforcement officers day after day after day, even using lasers to permanently damage the eyes of some of the officers. Well, the city of Eugene saw what was happening in Portland and tried to prevent that from happening in Eugene, Oregon. But Eugene is where Judge Katsabai presided. The city of Eugene sought to enforce a curfew to prevent similar violence in Eugene. And what did Judge Katsabai do? He blocked it. Not only did he block it, he retaliated against the city manager that enacted the curfew and the police chief that enforced the curfew. He denied them qualified immunity, in essence, throwing them to the wolves to be sued for trying to protect the citizens of Eugene, Oregon, and keep them safe. If you want to know whether a federal judge is going to stand with violent mobs or the citizens, you can look to this case and decide. And if you want to know whether the Senate Democrats are going to stand with the violent mobs of the citizens, you can look to their vote in just a moment and see as well. And again, that is not by association, my friend. That is your actions. When you say the word "I" over and over and over again, no matter the record, your actions are defining what you're doing. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, he invoked my name. I hate to slow things up, but he did not, to the record, he clarified that he's not calling us communists. He's calling all Democrats docile sheep. This from a guy who's afraid to face me in basketball since we've gotten here. I will quote to you simply from one of my toxic masculinity heroes, Mark Wayne Mullen. I quote, "Anytime, any place, cowboy."
The quote from that same senator, "Now's the time, now's the place." Where's Bernie asking us to settle down?
Sorry, we have a flood of nominees. Next is Mustafa Kazuai, nominated District of Oregon. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye.
Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal. Ms. Verona. Mr. Booker. Mr. Padilla. Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Welch. Butler. Mr. Graham.
No by proxy.
Mr. Grassley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz. No. Mr. Hawley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn.
No by proxy.
Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 11 and the nays are 10.
Nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Edward Keel, nominated to the District of New Jersey. Anyone seek recognition? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye.
Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Verona. Mr. Booker. Mr. Padilla. Mr. Ossoff.
You sure you want
Mr.
that?
Welch. Ms.
Sure you want
Butler.
that chair?
Mr. Graham.
No by proxy.
Mr. Grassley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz. No. Mr. Hawley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn.
No by proxy.
Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 11, the nays are 10.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Yumi Lee to the Northern District of California. Anyone seek recognition? The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye.
Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal. Sorry.
Aye.
Ms. Verona. Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Welch. Ms. Butler. Mr. Graham.
No by proxy.
Mr. Grassley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz. No. Mr. Hawley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton.
No by proxy. No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis,
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn,
No by proxy.
Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 11, the nays are 10.
Nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is David Leibovitz, nominated to the Southern District of Florida. Anyone seeking recognition? The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye.
Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono. Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Welch. Ms. Butler. Mr. Graham.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Grassley.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
Aye.
Mr. Lee.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz. No. Mr. Hawley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
Aye by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn.
No by proxy.
Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 16, the nays are 5.
Nomination be favorably reported to the floor. And next is Gretchen Lund to the Northern District of Indiana. Does anyone seek recognition? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye.
Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono. Mr. Booker. Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Welch. Ms. Butler. Mr. Graham.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Grassley.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
Aye.
Mr. Lee.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cruz. Mr. Hawley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
Aye by proxy.
I'm sorry.
Aye by proxy.
Thank you. Mrs. Blackburn.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Booker, aye.
Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Thank you. Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 20, the nays are 1.
Nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Sarah Russell, nominated to the District of Connecticut. If no one seeks recognition, the clerk will call.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cruz.
Mr. Chairman, this is the final nominee I intend to speak on. Sarah Russell, before this committee, failed to disclose a 2020 letter to the Connecticut governor that she signed, claiming she had no memory of this letter from just 3 years ago. It's easy to see why she would want to forget this letter. The letter was on its face extreme, and in any normal administration, this letter would be disqualifying to serve as a federal judge. The letter demanded that, due to COVID, the governor of Connecticut should, quote, immediately release to the maximum extent possible people incarcerated pre-trial and post-conviction. In other words, let everyone out, pre-trial and post-conviction. That's everyone. But just as importantly as what the letter says about releasing criminals, it's what it doesn't say. There's nothing in her letter that would limit the release to certain classes of criminals. There's nothing that says nonviolent offenders. She's calling for the release of murderers. She's calling for the release of rapists. She's calling for the release of pedophiles and sex traffickers and child pornographers, all of them, to the maximum extent possible, should be released into the community. The letter also demands, quote, a moratorium on new admissions into jails and prisons. You can be an axe murderer in Connecticut, but she wants a moratorium on new admissions into jails and prisons. This nominee wanted the governor to stop arresting people for committing crimes. I don't know if the plan was to nicely ask criminals, would you please stop murdering people? Please stop dealing drugs until COVID goes away. Or if the plan was just to give violent criminals a stern talking to and hope they will behave differently. In any event, this position is extreme. I look around this committee room. Many of you represent blue states with a lot of liberals as your citizens. I do not know a single state. Illinois, Rhode Island, none of the states here. Connecticut, the people of Connecticut would be horrified to know that a woman who signed a letter calling on the governor to release violent criminals into their community is now going to be a federal judge with the power to release violent criminals into their community. This is not mainstream. This is extreme, and yet this is who President Biden has nominated, and this is who Senate Democrats, like the Politburo, line up and vote for. Not a one of you, there is not a state liberal enough that your citizens would be happy. Why did you vote to confirm a judge who called on releasing criminals and rapists and child predators into our communities? That's what she signed, and that is not a position that any reasonable person would want to give her the power to execute on what she advocated. And so I urge the White House to withdraw this nominee, and I urge this committee to reject this nominee.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's nothing new here. This committee has already heard these allegations and more, and I would just make a couple of quick points. I know we have a full agenda. First of all, this nominee is extraordinarily well qualified as a scholar, a litigator, a teacher over decades. And that's the reason why the people of Connecticut do strongly support her nomination and why President Biden commendably has nominated her. There's nothing here that's been said by my colleague from Texas or anyone else on this committee that detracts from her qualifications. As to this letter, Sarah Russell has disavowed the views in it. She has told this committee that signing it was a mistake. It was overbroad. She didn't write it. She didn't edit it. She doesn't agree with its views. And maybe I'm the only one on this committee, but there are a few letters I've signed that I look back and said, gee, maybe not such a good idea. She was among 1,500 endorsing individuals for a letter that she now acknowledges was overbroad. And she has said, most importantly to this committee, that none of those views would impact her sentencing of defendants or any other actions she would take on the bench. There are a lot of Republican nominees who have had to disavow past views. I could list them, but they include, for example, Kenneth Lee, nominated to the Ninth Circuit, Wendy Vitter to the District of Louisiana, others who have had to supplement their records, Naomi Rao, Amy Coney Barrett. It happens, and we know it happens. And often there are letters or articles or other kinds of documents that have to be provided afterward. Ms. Russell disclosed 4,700 pages of records. She missed this one letter, and it encompasses 3 substantive pages. I submit to my colleague she is eminently qualified, and I suggest an affirmative vote.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar. Aye. Mr. Food.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Rono. Aye. Mr. Booker. Aye. Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff.
Aye.
Mr. Welch. Aye. Ms. Butler. Aye. Mr. Graham.
No by proxy.
Mr. Grassley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz? No. Mr. Holly?
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton?
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy?
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis?
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn?
No by proxy.
Chair Durbin?
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 11, the nays are 10.
Nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Clerk Sheriff, nominated to the Eastern District of California. If no one seeks recognition, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse?
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar? Aye. Mr. Coons?
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal? Aye. Ms. Hirono? Mr. Booker?
Aye.
Mr. Padilla?
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff?
Aye.
Mr. Welch?
Aye.
Ms. Butler? Mr. Graham?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Grassley?
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn?
No.
Mr. Lee?
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz?
No by proxy.
Mr. Holly?
No in person. Mr. Holly, no by proxy.
Mr. Cotton?
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy?
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis?
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn?
No by proxy.
Chair Durbin?
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 12, the nays are 9.
Thank you. The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Under the rules of the committee, we need 2 minority members present to continue. Unfortunately, we're going through these roll calls because we've been asked to renominate all these people and run them through, and we weren't extended the courtesy others have in the past. So under the current situation, I'm going to ask that the committee stand adjourned unless Senator Cruz is coming back. Do you know? You going to stay for the? Okay. We're still in business. Next is Julie Sneed, nominated to the Middle District of Florida. If no one seeks recognition, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse?
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar? Aye. Mr. Coons?
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal? Aye. Ms. Hirono? Mr. Booker?
Aye.
Mr. Padilla?
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff? Mr. Welch? Ms. Butler? Mr. Graham?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Grassley?
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn?
No by proxy. No in person.
Mr. Lee?
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz? Mr. Holly?
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton?
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy?
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis?
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn?
No by proxy.
Chair Durbin?
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 12, the nays are 9.
Nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Joseph Lorosky, nominated to the Court of International Trade. If no one seeks recognition, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse?
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar? Mr. Coons?
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal?
Aye.
Ms. Hirono? Mr. Booker?
Klobuchar, please. Aye for Booker.
Okay. Ms. Klobuchar? Aye. Mr. Booker?
Aye.
Mr. Padilla?
That's 2 votes for me. Aye.
Mr. Ossoff?
Aye.
Thanks, comrade.
Mr. Welch? Ms. Butler? Mr. Graham?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Grassley?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn?
Aye.
Mr. Lee?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cruz? Mr. Holly?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cotton?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Tillis?
Aye by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn?
Aye by proxy.
Chair Durbin?
Aye. Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 21, and there were no nays.
Nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Elisa Wong, nominated to the Court of International Trade. If no one seeks recognition, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse?
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar? Aye. Mr. Coons?
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal?
Aye.
Ms. Hirono? Mr. Booker?
Aye.
Mr. Padilla?
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff? Mr. Welch? Ms. Butler? Mr. Graham?
Aye by proxy.
Mr.
No by proxy.
Sorry, sir, that was a no? A no?
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn?
No.
Mr. Lee?
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz?
No.
Mr. Hawley?
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton?
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy?
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis?
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn?
No by proxy.
Chair Durbin?
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 12, the nays are 9.
Nomination to be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Ramona Mangalonia, nominated to serve a second 10-year term for the District Court of the Northern Mariana Islands. If no one seeks recognition, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse?
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar? Aye. Mr. Coons?
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal?
Aye.
Mr. Rono? Aye. Mr. Booker?
Aye.
Mr. Padilla?
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff?
Aye.
Mr. Welch?
Aye.
Ms. Butler? Mr. Graham?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Grassley?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn?
Aye.
Mr. Lee?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cruz?
Aye.
Mr. Hawley?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cotton?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Tillis?
Aye by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn?
Aye by proxy.
Chair Durbin?
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 21.
Nomination to be favorably reported to the floor. And for the last nominee, we have Deborah Robinson to the Intellectual Property Enforcement Coordinator, Executive Office of the President. If no one seeks recognition, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse?
Thanks, John.
Ms. Klobuchar?
Thanks for sticking around.
Mr. Coons?
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal?
Aye.
Mr. Rono? Mr. Booker?
Aye.
Mr. Padilla?
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff?
Aye.
Mr. Welch?
Aye.
Ms. Butler? Mr. Graham?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Grassley?
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn?
No.
Mr. Lee?
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz?
No.
Mr. Hawley?
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton?
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy?
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis?
No, aye by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn?
No by proxy.
Chair Durbin?
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 13, the nays are 8.
Nomination to be favorably reported to the floor. And with that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.